Hello, everyone. We are now on our third piece of the digestive system lecture. We have already gone through the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and now we're going to talk about two accessory organs that are not part of the GI tract, but that do provide liquids that are going to be really important to what the small intestine does. Okay, so we're going to talk about the liver producing bile and the pancreas producing pancreatic juice. Okay, so let us look at the liver. Here is the liver. It's your giant internal organ there. Okay, and the liver has a lot of functions. It does a lot of good stuff for us. For example, we've already talked a little bit about how the liver is going to filter the blood and remove glucose and store it as glycogen. So remember when we were talking about the post-absorptive state? Sorry, wrong words. Absorptive state, it filters out, takes out that glucose, hooks them together, and stores them as glycogen, so that when you get to the post-absorptive state, you can break apart that glycogen to increase the amount of glucose in our bloodstream. Okay, so we've talked about number 2 already, but for today, our focus is going to be on the production of bile. Liver produces bile. Okay, so when the liver produces the bile, it's going to secrete that bile into the very first part of the small intestine, the duodenum or the duodenum. You can say it like that if you want to. Okay, it's going to go into that small intestine, and that's where you're going to have the majority of the lipid digestion. If it does not have any proteins or fats present in the duodenum, the liver is still making bile, but you don't need it right now. So instead, what's going to happen is it's going to back up through what's called the cystic duct and go into the gallbladder. Okay, so the function of the gallbladder is not to make bile. The function of the gallbladder is to store excess bile until it is needed. Okay, so I always get the question, well, can you live without your gallbladder? Yes, you can. It does make your diet choices really, you have to be really careful about your diet because you can't have too much fat at any given time. It'll give you a really bad tummy ache. But yes, you don't technically need your gallbladder because the liver is the one that produces the bile. The gallbladder is just like your little backup storage area. Okay, so again, the function of the liver is to produce the bile, and the function of the gallbladder is to store excess bile. Okay, on to the pancreas. The pancreas is what we call a mixed gland, and what we mean by mixed gland is that it has both an endocrine function as well as an exocrine function. So we will talk about endocrine system later in the semester, but just sort of a preview. Within the pancreas, we have what are called alpha and beta cells, and they're going to produce two different hormones called insulin and glucagon, which collectively together, they will regulate blood sugar levels. But today, we're going to be focusing on the exocrine function, and the exocrine as in secreting into the surface, so in this case, into the duodenum, it produces a solution that's called pancreatic juice. Okay, and the solution means that it is a mixture of stuff. Okay, so it's going to release that pancreatic juice through the pancreatic duct and into the duodenum, which is in the same location where the bile is coming in. Okay, so we've got some stuff. Okay, so what I want you to do now, and I realize I haven't talked about it yet, I want you to try to guess, based on what you already know, the function of each component within that pancreatic juice. Okay, so these are the 5 things that you find in that juice. What do you think they do? I bet you can figure out quite a lot of them, so go ahead and try. Okay, so hopefully you give it a shot. Okay, now let's talk about it. Water. Water. Think about what water does in most solutions. Most of the time, and especially in our human body, water is the solvent. Right? The thing that things are dissolved into, okay? So that's the major function of the water. Bicarbonate ions, we saw that already. We saw that when we talked about buffers. Bicarbonate ion is a weak base, and so what it does is it helps to neutralize some of the acid coming in from the stomach. Okay, so you've got a lot of hydrogen ions coming in. So the bicarbonate ions will bind to those hydrogen ions, increasing the pH back up. Okay, so it's going to protect the lining of the small intestine. We also have 3 enzymes. Okay, so I want for you to look at the ending here, ASE. ASE means it is an enzyme. So we have 3 different enzymes. And I didn't tell you what any of them did, but I'm hoping that you can figure it out. I'd actually like to skip over number 3 and let's do this one. So we did not talk about pancreatic amylase, but we did talk about salivary amylase. So salivary amylase and pancreatic amylase have the same function. What was that? Okay, they are hydrolytic enzymes that chemically digest carbohydrates. So things like starch are going to break broken down into smaller pieces. Okay, so that one we have. Now, pancreatic lipase, we didn't talk about pancreatic lipase, but we did talk about lingual lipase, and lingual lipase is for the chemical digestion of lipids. Now, it's not very particularly helpful in the mouth because we don't have bile yet in order to emulsify, but the pancreatic lipase is going to be very effective at chemically digesting the lipids into its monomers, which would be monoglycerides and fatty acids. Okay, so those 2 hopefully you got out. Now my hope was that once you figured out that we have 1 for carbohydrates, 1 for lipids, this one here, hopefully you took a look at the name, proteases, and you figured out that proteases, therefore the chemical digestion of proteins. Okay, so we have 1 for each macromolecule: proteins, carbohydrates, lipids. Okay, so now let's talk about the hormonal regulation of pancreatic juice. Okay, so we've already talked about 1 hormone. Try to remind yourself, gastrin. Where is it produced? What's its action? Where is its target organs? Okay, so now we're going to do 2 more. We have cholecystokinin, which is super hard to say, but so you can say CCK, cholecystokinin. That is going to be produced by the cells in the duodenum. Okay, so this cell right here is going to be released if you have food present. Okay, so when chyme comes into the small intestine that has proteins and fats in it, the cells lining the duodenum will release cholecystokinin, and what it does is it has 2 actions. The first action is once it goes into the bloodstream, it will go to the pancreas and it's going to trigger the release of more enzymes in that pancreatic juice. Its other action is to go to the liver and cause it to release more bile. It also causes contractions of the gallbladder to increase amount of bile as well. Okay, so it is going to increase bile and increase enzymes in the pancreatic juice when there's food, especially things like proteins and fats, present in the small intestine. Okay, so that's number 2, that's the second hormone. The third hormone that we're going to talk about is secretin. Now, secretin is going to be secreted from those duodenal cells, right? So the lining of the small intestine, when there's a lot of acid present, when there's a lot of hydrogen ions. Okay, so when the chyme coming in from the stomach is really acidic, it's going to release secretin. The secretin then goes into the bloodstream like all hormones do. It's going to travel around and it'll go to the pancreas and cause the pancreas to release bicarbonate. And as we've seen before, bicarbonate, that's that weak base whose job it is to bind to those hydrogen ions to increase the pH. Okay, so we have cholecystokinin and secretin. Both are secreted from the duodenum, so from the small intestine. Okay, so when food is present, that's when you have cholecystokinin secretion. When there's acid present, especially hydrogen ions present, that's when you release secretin. Okay, so we're gonna review that after we go through the large intestine. So in the large intestine, So at this point, we've worked our way through the small intestine. In the large intestine, we have we've been taking nutrients out, right? So the majority of absorption occurs in the small intestine, but in the large intestine, think of it as like the last hurrah for absorption, the last opportunity to draw things out. And the one I want to focus on mostly is the water. So the majority of the water is absorbed in the small intestine, right? Not large intestine, small intestine. But the large intestine is really good at drawing out additional water as the body needs it. Okay, so of the remaining water, it draws out extra water, more water. Okay, so that's a major function of the large intestine, reabsorption of water. Okay, and then I also wanted to mention, which is a little bit outside this class, it's actually better for microbiology, but I also wanted to mention that our large intestine has a large microflora population, which just means there's a lot of good bacteria in your large intestine, and your large intestine these good bacteria are really important for immunity. Any ideas how they could help with immunity? How can bacteria help you with immunity, help protect you from other bacteria? And the answer is competition, right? So these good bacteria, they take up space, they take up nutrients, and once they have an established population, it makes it more difficult from other foreign bacteria and other, pathogens trying to get a hold, right? So there's no space for them left, and so it makes it more difficult for them to establish themselves and cause disease, right? So when we say good bacteria, we're talking about those bacteria that are supposed to be there. Also, as an added bonus, we get a lot of vitamins and nutrients produced from these good bacteria. Okay, so remember, bacteria aren't all bad. There's some good ones in there that are important. Okay, so I'm mentioning that, but the one that's in a red box here is what I want to talk about right now for physio. Let's talk about that. So the majority of water is absorbed in the small intestine. The large intestine, though, has these proton pumps. Okay, so we have the sodium-potassium pump. Remember that one? That is that form of primary active transport. So we're going to use ATP to pump 3 sodium ions out of the cell, for 2 potassiums into the cell. Okay, so we are going to create an osmotic gradient here. Okay, so we move salt around, but when you are moving salt around, you also are going to move water around, right? Remember, solutes suck. So as we are pumping the sodium out of those cells, it's going to draw the sodium in through the lining. Okay, so just to orient yourself, here's the lumen, where the food would be, and the waste, right? Here it is. This is your lining of the intestines. Okay, and then anything that's going to end up on this side, the extracellular food, will end up into your body, in your blood. Okay, so it pumps out the 3 sodium. That is going to draw the sodium into the cells and then pump them out the other side. Okay, so now that you have a higher concentration of sodium over here, the water will follow out. Okay, so the water will follow out through osmosis. Okay, so we're going to create a steep osmotic gradient, and that's going to draw the additional water out so that by the time it gets out of your large intestine, most of the water is going to be reabsorbed back into the body, because we want that water. Your cells are made of water. We've got lots of extracellular fluid, so we want to keep as much of the water as possible. Okay, so I would like you to try to answer this on your own. So pause, see if you can do it, and then let's go over it together. Okay, so we are looking at the hormone secretin. Okay, so we talked about 3 hormones today. Make sure you can do this for all 3. So for secretin, what organ releases secretin? That is the small intestine, specifically the duodenum. What triggers the release of secretin? the presence of hydrogen ions in the small intestine, right? So if it's very acidic, the food coming in from the stomach is acidic, it's going to release secretin from the small intestine. What is the target organ? So where are they going? Where is this hormone going? Okay, so for this one, it's going to go to the pancreas. Once it gets to the pancreas, what is the primary action? What is the purpose, the function of that hormone? And what it does is it causes these acinar cells, the pancreas cells, to secrete bicarbonate. And bicarbonate is important because that is going to help bind those extra hydrogen ions coming off of the acidic kind. Okay, so again, please make sure you're able to do this with gastrin and cholecystokinin as well. So we are going to have a lecture quiz next time, and this right here is the point of stopping for the lecture quiz. Okay, so what I mean by that is I am going to talk about macromolecule digestion and absorption, but it will not be specifically on the next lecture quiz. Okay, so up until this point. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause and I'll restart for the next one.